liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Note for the record that all council members are present.
Okay, duly noted. Adoption of the agenda, or any deletions, additions, changes, or otherwise?
Move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, we have an agenda. First up is a presentation by Emil Margolis from Evolve. This is a reform of Proposition 13 for large business property owners, and I think some of us call that corporate commercial property. So, Emil?
Hello, thank you for having me. Actually, my name is Ben Grief. I'm the campaign director with Evolve.
Oh, okay.
So sorry about that, but I'm definitely here and really excited to talk to you guys about reforming Prop 13. First of all, Evolve is a local nonprofit that works to increase funding for public education. So thank you again for having me. Mm-hmm. And we come to this issue because we're 49th in the nation in education funding. And municipalities around the state are struggling to fund essential services. And we believe that the fairest way to provide desperately needed revenue for things like public education is by reforming Prop 13. So why say reform Prop 13 and not repeal? Because that's not what we're advocating for. Prop 13 was meant to protect people, and it should remain in place to protect people. The reform we're advocating for will not change Prop 13 for homeowners, apartment owners, home renters, apartment renters, nor will it change Prop 13 protections for small business owners. Our focus is specifically on large commercial property owners. After all, Prop 13 was passed 36 years ago to protect people, and it should remain in place to protect people. But today, in California, the tax burden has really dramatically shifted from commercial property to residential property. As you see, 72% of property taxes now are coming from homeowners, while only 28% are coming from commercial property. And if you see here in San Mateo, the discrepancy between what homeowners and commercial property owners are paying is even more drastic. In 1972, the property tax burden for residential property owners was 65%, while non-residential property owners paid 35%. But by 2010, homeowners shouldered 81% of the burden, and commercial property owners only shouldered 19%. Now, how is this possible? Well, it's possible because although Prop 13 meant well, it did have some unintended and unforeseen consequences. Under Prop 13, all property in California is only reassessed upon transfer. So people buy and sell homes every day. The national average for this is about 12 years. Here in California, it's around 10 years. However, large commercial property rarely changes hands, so it's rarely ever reassessed. So ironically, the law that was meant to protect homeowners has actually benefited large corporations the most. So, for example, the Walt Disney Corporation is still paying property taxes for Disneyland based on 1975 value. So this equates to about 5 cents a square foot, while, as you can see, the average homeowner in California pays 40 cents a square foot. So not only do homeowners pay 8 times more in property tax rates than the Walt Disney Corporation, but our cash-strapped state is losing out on millions of dollars a year in desperately needed revenue, just from one property. Another example is Chevron. Chevron owns vast amounts of property across the state. And since they've owned most of this property since before 1978, Chevron is undertaxed by nearly $1 billion. That's $1 billion that should be going to our schools and our public services. Now, these are two corporations who can easily afford to pay their fair share. But because of loopholes in Prop 13, they'll never be asked to. And under our current system, Chevron and Disney are going to continue to pay property taxes based on this 1975 value forever. And this was certainly not the original intent of the law. So we must responsibly reform Prop 13 so we can adequately fund our schools and vital services without continuing to increase the tax burden on individuals. So if you look, the rest of the nation reassesses their commercial property regularly. This means that their citizens aren't consistently asked to foot an increasingly disproportionate share of the bill for their schools and public services. In fact, 40 out of 50 states tax their commercial property at a higher rate than residential property, not the other way around, the way we do here in California. And today, California has the highest income and sales tax in the country. And local governments are forced to rely on funding their schools and public services with parcel taxes and bond measures. And how much more can we ask individuals to pay? Now, it's time that we put our state on par with the rest of the country. And the great news is that Californians, most of them agree. The latest PPIC poll that came out in January shows that 59% of likely voters support regularly reassessing commercial property. And even though politicians in Sacramento don't seem to realize this, making corporations pay their fair share is something that Californians support. So far, we have 53 school boards and city councils from across the state, from San Diego up to Humboldt County, that have already adopted a resolution and taken a stand for tax fairness. So we believe it's time to make Prop 13 work for the people it was meant to protect. So I certainly urge you to take up this resolution at your next city council meeting. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Emil. Is there any questions for him? Great.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a great presentation, and
Thank you.
I really liked that slide that you showed with how much a disparity between residential and commercial has evolved over the past 40 years or 35 years. So, yeah, keep up the good work. I hope some other cities are interested in hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, no, most definitely. We have mostly, as you can see, mostly school boards right now. That was the first groups that we reached out to. But now we're just beginning our outreach to city councils. And Oakland City Council has this on their consent calendar tomorrow. And we have several others throughout the month. So we'd definitely love for you guys to join them.
Very good. Thank you for coming, Emil. It was a good presentation.
Thank you very much.
Clear. All right. Okay. That brings us to oral communications number 1. I do have a few slips. First one is from Mark Nagale from Office of Jackie Spear to give us an update. Mark, how are you?
Nice to see you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. It's nice to see everyone again. I'm actually here. The Congressman was asked that we go to various cities and remind the council members if there are any federal issues that our office can be of assistance. Please don't hesitate to contact us. I know our office has been working with staff in the past and also with council members on certain issues. Just a quick legislative update, a couple of things that the Congressman has worked on. On Saturday, we actually had a Women's Economic Advancement event at Facebook where we had over 100 young women there, and our main speaker was, the keynote speaker was a woman from NASA, encouraging women to take STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, because that's where the careers are. And it was great to see all these women there, and the congresswoman encouraging them to follow their dreams and not stop. And in terms of constituent cases, it's an honor to work with many of the City Council's members here and also with constituents from Brisbane. If there are any issues that our office can be of assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us. One of the main issues that I work on is veterans issues. And I'm proud to say that within the last 2 years, our office has been able to recover $4 million in VA benefits. And that's because of the leadership of the Congresswoman, and there's been several residents from Brisbane that I've been able to help. So I just want to encourage residents and council members, if there's anything our office can do in the future, please don't hesitate to contact me or our district director, Brian Perkins. We can be reached at 650-342-0300. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah,
Questions
thank you,
for
Mark.
Mark?
Oh, you guys have been so receptive, for, to Brisbane, and I know that we all really, really appreciate that, and, looking forward to having the Congresswoman help us with the rollout of the EA from the FAA in regards to airplane noise.
Yes.
And, you guys have been great, and Brian's been excellent to work with as well, so.
I know you've been working with Brian Perkins a lot, so I'm glad that we have this working partnership. So if there's, again, if other than airport noise, if there's anything else, our office is here to help. So
Yeah, you guys have been always, open, which is great. So thank you for that.
thank you very much.
Sure, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, next slip I have is Dana Dilworth, Oral Communications number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. One of the joys of being a substitute teacher is that I get subjects thrown my way that I might need, or for some reason I wouldn't normally delve into. But I've recently worked with Plato's Republic, Book 2, in which there's the discussion of why we establish government, why we set up government, and they use the word justice or virtue, and how what struck me when I was doing this lesson was that we have different definitions for good, and that to me might be a problem that is here in this town, especially after having gone through 6 months of a draft EIR and have one look at one person's interpretation of what is good and virtuous and another person's interpretation. What I'm here to speak about, rather than just be esoteric, is our tree planting rules. I expressed my concern over some, actually many times, only more recently for one issue, but it's been the myoprim that were considered for the fire station. It's been the China berries that were considered for the medians. It's, and without, I don't want anybody to feel bad about planting plants or having the arborist zeal of planting trees. It is in our best interest. But one of the things from Plato's Republic says justice must be actual and not appear to just be good. And so this is where I guess I get the rub, is we are going through positive things, but in terms of it being the absolute good for Brisbane, we're missing the mark. And so when I started questioning about plants that were chosen for something recently, I suppose I asked them in a way that got the city defensive, because all of a sudden the city employees were, oh, well, we talked to a qualified person, but is that person qualified for Brisbane? And same with the draft EIR. Were those people qualified to review it for Brisbane? Because if we don't follow our own laws, follow the places where we as a community have agreed that we want to have some type of control, some type of structure for the better good of all. And again, I think we're missing the mark. I think you need to, especially we're going to have some issues with open area, open space. We have issues with interpretation of our laws, which are now starting, in my opinion, to unravel, because the people, you guys, who have the power to do it better haven't enacted any new laws in quite some time, except for the ones that take the rights away from us as being able to file, grievances and things like that. And specifically, I was looking at today the lot line adjustments and how that doesn't have to be, and nobody needs to be informed for a whole year if somebody changes lot lines. And so the whole idea of creating laws so that we can all live by them is what you're here to do, and what we as a body of taxpayers and voters want you to do. And I would hope that in the near future you create a tree planting list that's appropriate for Brisbane and not just anywhere else in the Bay Area or anywhere else in USA. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Okay, next slip. Andrew Torvik.
Hi, I'm Andy Torvik. I live at 231 Alvarado Street in Brisbane. I've lived there for 50 years. I brought some issues forth a while back, and I didn't get anything responsible about what questions I had posed. And tonight I want to put it to rest. And the idea is that there's, through discovery, I went to Redwood City and found out the city owns a 3-foot passage easement to the right of the Russo property, where there is extreme violations of code with regard to very treacherous landing. I asked the city if they would send their building inspector out and evaluate it. To my knowledge, he did. I asked for a copy of his report. I was denied it. All right, well, that's okay. But the sewer that lies within the 3-foot easement isn't okay. Water's coming from unknown sources, which I believe, from living there 50 years, is coming from the easement area. And when the city, Randy Bruo, and Dale Allen came out to photograph the patch, the work that was done in an area immediate to a year and a half ago, they put a Band-Aid patch on where the tree roots still are prone to uplift the existing sewer lines on 2 properties that share that easement at the city line. So there's no resolve. There's no letter that I asked for acknowledging the fact that the search is incomplete because they had a snake with a camera on it go up there and they refused to penetrate the problem in the area of the easement for fear, I believe, that they own it. And they're, without transferring the title for $1 to Madeline, the city is still the responsible party until it's recorded and transferred. And that's what I would expect. The most reasonable thing would be to record it so that the city doesn't bear any liability where the stairs are treacherously dangerous at the foot. And if the city doesn't assume its responsible position in either the sewer or the stairwell, that the city isn't doing their job. The city needs to do what they're paid to do, and that's the building inspector should come out, evaluate, make a determination based upon his knowledge and skill, submit it to the city manager for approval, and it should be public knowledge. The decision I beg for the second time, and I'm going to put this to rest because if I don't gain any resolve, what's the sense of it all? I don't find any sense in putting something down the road that's going to affect people directly or indirectly based upon such a trivial matter called sewer and danger stairs, all in the city-owned easement until it takes a responsible position and sells it to the Russos for $1. They are responsible for anything that emits from that easement, danger and filth. As a year and a half ago, it was sewage, and I'm the first recipient on the downhill side. If I could raise my house, it would be somebody else's problem. But being as it is my problem, immediate to it, I'd like the city to make a complete evaluation with camera and not hold back. Go on in that pipe where you refused to do it. You stopped and you didn't fully evaluate anything, and I have to this date not received any information other than the fact is Clay Holstein told me I wasn't entitled to have any legal document with regard to any of these instances I brought up. I'd like the city or the council that we elect to be in a position to render a decision one way or the other, and it should be a responsible position for not just the immediate tenants, but for those that walk in the future. So that's it. That's my plea. I'd like to look you all in the face, but I think better while I'm looking at the dirt and the ground.
Thank you, Andy. Clay, care to do a quick update on this? Because I think we're fairly familiar with this issue.
Well, I believe there's two issues that Mr. Torvik is bringing forward. One of them has to do with the groundwater. We've had the groundwater tested on at least 2 occasions by the San Mateo County Health Department. They found that there were no violations. They have verbally told us that they are not going to come out again on the same complaint. So I think that one, from the city's perspective, is put to rest. The other issue had to do with a door that was replaced by a private property owner. Simple door replacements are not required to get a permit. And so that's basically where both of those issues stand. As far as my conversation with Mr. Torvik, I simply told him that I'm not going to start putting in writing letters to private property to non-interested private property owners about things that aren't on their property. I mean, because then we could be chasing our tail around town, neighbor to neighbor, and I don't think that that's a constructive sort of situation for the city to be in, and I don't think it's constructive in terms of neighbor to neighbor relations either. So that's where those things stand, and answer any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any more slips for oral communications. Anybody wish to orally communicate further? Okay, not seeing any takers. We'll move right along to consent calendar. And anybody wish to remove anything?
Yeah, I'd like to remove C and E, please.
C and D?
E isn't Edward.
C and E.
And I'd like to remove A for a minor adjustment.
Okay. Do I have a motion for B and D?
So move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Let's start from the top. Item A, Terry?
On the last page, council members concurred on the selection of February 1st for the fire station and Zippy car dedication. I think that is the Zip car dedication. Unlike the Zippy car race.
Yes.
And with that, I would move for approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, item C, Cliff?
Yeah, I know that at, I guess our previous council meeting, we talked about just appointing all of the applicants for the Planning Commission, Park and Rec Commission, Open Space and Ecology Committee in the past, or also Complete Street Safety Committee. In the past, we've interviewed applicants, whether they were new or reapplying, and I'd like for us to perhaps remove it for future discussion, just because we have a lot of folks in the room tonight regarding other matters on the agenda. But personally, I feel that we should interview the applicants.
So you wish to move this to discuss whether we should interview the applicants? Is that what I'm hearing?
Or agree to just set up
Postpone the
interview
issue
time.
and discuss it more thoroughly at a subsequent meeting.
Well, it doesn't, I mean, I'm
Either
fine
way,
with,
right?
yes, we could do another meeting where we discuss it, or we could just establish tonight, yes, let's move forward with doing interviews.
But the most efficient thing would be to just postpone it to the next meeting, this issue.
It's up to you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, if we postponed it until the next meeting, we would still need to schedule interviews if that was the council's
If that's what they,
concern
yes.
to do that.
That's correct.
And that would put off having some of these committees have full contingencies and be able to select their upcoming chairs and get their work plans going for the future.
Yeah, it could be a problem for leadership, but I think most of the people who are not returning are continuing to serve until the new people are appointed.
How about if we do this? We kind of already kind of agreed that right thing to do would be to appoint them. Why don't we go ahead and appoint them and then interview them? Because there's really no controversy or conflict here. But there's no seats where we're choosing one over another.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just,
And I think that would take care of being able to appoint the chairs and stuff like that and allow the committees and commissions to move forward. At the same time, we could sit down and talk with folks. And it would be a lot less pressure on them and pressure on us, as far as selecting, because we know that we're going to select them anyway.
well, I mean, I think that's kind of the whole thing, why you would do the interview, because you don't want to set that type of precedent, right? I mean, these are important positions. And so, just in respect to the positions that these folks want to serve, it seems appropriate to interview.
So how do we deal with rotations of council or having a quorum on some of the committees? Because basically stopping it.
I mean, I'm giving you my opinion. I mean, if the rest of the council wants to go with what you recommend, Clark, then that's fine. I just think that this is something that we've done in the past where we've interviewed these applicants, and I think it's appropriate to do so.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but we've rarely have where they're there's no competition there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then of course, then in the future, if there's no competition, but perhaps there is an individual that maybe the council might not want to have on a commission, but because we've established that, how do you then tell that person no?
I agree with Cliff that it's a good idea to interview new applicants, just so we can get a sense, of who they are and know them before they serve. And there are only 2 new applicants, right, on this list, or 3, I suppose. So I wouldn't have any problem with appointing the people who are reapplying at this time, and then scheduling interviews for the new applicants. I think that's right.
If that's what you guys want to do, I'm fine with it. Though I do feel that we should interview them all. I have to say, my wife is one of the Park and Rec commissioners that's reapplying. I mean, to me, I just think that everyone should be interviewed, and and I've been on some of these interviews where people have reapplied, and they've been actually very pleasant, and you get to learn a little bit about what's going on inside that particular body, and I don't see it as an interview where there's a lot of pressure. It's just I think it's just something you should do. It just seems appropriate.
We have 3 options on the table, and Ray and Terry, we care to go one way or the other on this? I mean, I'm okay with doing that. I just, let's say if we put it off for 2 weeks to have the discussion, and
why don't we have been discussing it? Maybe
hold on, and then ask staff to see if this is going to impact any of the rotations or anything critical, or not having a quorum to be able to make a decision. Because as far as I'm concerned, the planning commissioners would stay in place. The Park and Rec commissioners who are there would stay in place until we do interview anyway, right? It's just the new folks who are applying for the first time would not be part of the commission until we interview and then appoint them. Is that correct?
You just look at history. I mean, usually people that are already on a body and they reapply, they pretty much continue. I mean, so I mean, you're right there that it's probably very likely that they would continue. And just looking at these names, I don't see any of them not, moving forward. It's just, again, it's more of the, disrespecting the process, I think. But, we are March 3rd, and this is probably something we should have done in January. So for this one here, maybe perhaps we just interview the new folks.
My concern is that this is 16 people that we would need to schedule interviews with. and I'm not sure what kind of staff timing and what council timing is on that.
8 people?
16, I got 8.
I thought you wanted to re-interview everyone who's applying or reapplying.
We got 8 people right here.
Yeah. It's just the 8 showing on the consent calendar.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
not everybody.
That's still quite a bit of time, but
But we've always done it. I mean, this would be,
Well,
as far as I know.
No, we've actually appointed in the past when they've been, unchallenged. We have done that. And it's only happened one time in city council, I think, in election of 2003, where nobody challenged the incumbent, so they didn't have an election, which was sad. But I get your point, Cliff. I think we should move forward and appoint them and then go ahead and interview afterwards and set it up in different phases. That way we can time it out. Right? What do you think? I see you salivating over this.
No, yeah. I think there is some point to doing some interviewing, particularly of people that we don't know yet.
Mhm.
If you want to go ahead and reappoint the ones who are seeking reapplication, that would be okay with me. So that would be my kind of cut on it. Let's appoint those, and I don't think we need to interview those, but it would be, I think, helpful to my opinion to interview people who are new that we don't know yet. That's how I'd look at it.
Okay. And,
But I wouldn't appoint them before we interview them.
okay.
It seems like the cart.
So that comes down to 3 people then.
Mm-hmm, right.
That would be Madison Davis for the Parks and Rec Commission, Michael Abney for Open Space and Ecology, and Linda Montenegro Detmer for our Complete Street Safety Committee. And all these people I know, so, but not everybody does, so. So is somebody, Cliff, you okay with that, or I know you want to interview them all, right?
If, again, if that's the pleasure of the council to do it that way, I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Well, it's an interest in moving forward, somebody throwing a motion out there of doing something.
All right, so I'll make a motion to approve item C, but removing Madison Davis and Michael Abney and Linda Montenegro Detmer from the from this list of appointed advisors to establish a interview at a future date.
May I make a suggestion to make it easier on you instead of an additional meeting night, maybe starting at 6:30 in 2 weeks before your meeting and interviewing the 3?
I think that would be fine.
Yeah. And Mr. City Attorney, this is okay to do this way?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. All right. We have a second to Cliff's motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Item E, Cliff?
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask Randy a couple of questions. Sorry, Randy, that I didn't, touch base with you before tonight's meeting.
No worries, sir.
So, so just looking at the different options that are available to us to remedy the rock slide. So, so we have. Well, first of all, who owns Bayshore at that segment of road?
The city does, sir.
The city does.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So we don't own all the hill, right?
That's correct, sir.
Okay.
UPC owns part of the hill.
That is correct.
All right. And then, so we have these different options to remedy the problem. The $30,000 amount for the design would be for a particular type of remedy, and that would be the
wire mesh slope drapery.
Drapery.
The drapery, the slope, the wire mesh that would be laid on the slope in its existing cut at the angle it's presently at.
Yeah. just looking at all the different options, I mean, that's my favorite. I think it aesthetically is the most pleasing, and then I think it takes care of the job as well. Though you had some other options here, so have we decided, this is the direction that we're going to go as far as remedying this problem?
Well, if the council were to approve the action before them tonight, sir, it would be the design of the wire mesh slope drapery. So then the next time you would hear about this again would when we would be bringing construction plans and specifications and an updated construction estimate to you and a request for budget.
Okay. I just wanted to get clarification for that. So I'm fine with that.
Sure.
And I have a couple comments. It seems to me that I've seen other hillsides in other locations that once you start trying to remedy the situation, you almost make it worse because they have to go in and scrape the area, get a level surface to be able to put the drapery down or put a retaining wall or put a catchment fence. And I'm wondering if we were to have a project out on the Baylands, is this road scheduled for being widened, or this property going to be regraded or affected where this is a plan that is going to be not adequate once an additional widening of the road cut is made, and so it would still be a temporary solution? And would we be remiss with our legal requirements to keep the roadway safe by just cleaning out the catchment basin, which it sounds like that's part of the problem, is that the catchment basin behind the K-rail has filled with debris? And might we be better off, until we know what kind of timing we have on a project or potential project out at the Baylands, to do that kind of remediation as a temporary basis rather than designing a hardscape?
Ma'am, I'm not aware of any proposals in any of the four concepts that have been studied in the Baylands EAR which would require a widening of Bayshore Boulevard in that location. And specifically, as we were going through the circulation elements, we made every effort to avoid impacting Icehouse Hill. We made every effort to put any roadway considerations around and away from that area. So I would suggest that whatever we put down now is going to be there for its engineered design life, which would be 25 to 50 years. I think the conversation and what concerns me now is I don't want to speak from a legal sense regarding our liability. I'll speak from the engineering sense. We've had the K-rail out there for a little over 10 years. We're seeing now that in the northern part of the slope, closer to where Guadalupe Canyon Parkway comes in, the talus buildup is starting to accelerate. And the piece that concerns me a little more is that in the southern half, as you're closer to the entry to the police department's range, is that the geologists have identified the potential for larger rocks to come down, for a 3-foot diameter rock or so to come down, which if it came bouncing down there, it could skip the K-rail. It could cause a significant amount of damage to motorists. So I think that once we're aware of those items, it would be my recommendation that we move forward and attempt to mitigate it as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate that we do something about this, but that we also discuss it because it is a big expense item. Everyone should know what we're doing and why, and I think you've started that conversation, which is good. But it could cost us at least up to $225,000 to put this in place.
Sure.
And it struck me, one, that maybe the actual construction of it is really a capital project rather than a operational one. I wanted to check to see if I'm right about that. And number two, there's a possibility of getting some contributions from other parties. In the staff report, you mentioned since part of the land is owned by UPC, maybe there's some kind of responsibility they have too. And since this is a main arterial way, maybe we can get some kind of help from state or MTC or other sources in order to ensure the safety of this roadway, which is a major arterial. So I'm sure you've been thinking about that, but I would like you to discuss it so everybody knows that we are not just, happy to throw money away if we can find some support from someplace else.
We love spending other people's money when we can find it, sir. There's nothing quite like grant money that comes without attachments or without interest being paid back on it. And you're not the only individual to have asked about the possibility of getting money elsewhere. I was elsewhere when the mayor was talking with me earlier about it today. He had also asked if we had applied for FEMA grant. The problem with getting grants for this roadway is that it's a problem for us, but it really doesn't rise to a big enough problem in the world of things that need to be mitigated across the region, across the state, across the country, that others are terribly interested in it. Slopes are a very challenging issue. In fact, FEMA actually has what they call a slope policy, where honestly they do everything in their power to not mitigate slopes and to really not even fund their repair after they've fallen. The only reason we were successful doing that up in the 900 block of Humboldt is that in that case it had been a pretty significant failure for that small stretch of road, and it was starting to underpin one of the houses, the house that's closest to where Humboldt and Kings come together at the bottom there, kind of across from where the Newmans live, that larger gray residence. And that was the only thing we were able to get them on. So we did look into the possibility of getting funding from other places, but it just doesn't get high enough up on people's radar screen to be interested. I think the elephant in the room that we're not talking about yet is the adjoining property owner. And again, I mentioned I've got two of you in there, and I think Councilmember Liu was talking with me about this earlier. There is a map in the last page of the report that shows the approximate location of the property lines. Certainly one of the things that we're going to do as we develop the project is we are going to survey that out and obtain the accurate information on how much of the square footage of the slope, because we've got over an acre of square footage of slope that's going to have to be mitigated, and we're going to be able to assign the square footage that the city owns, and we will assign the square footage that an adjoining property owner might own, and I am certain that we will have a conversation with that property owner, offering them the opportunity to either join in our project or to instigate their own project and abate a nuisance they have and come in and do it on their own dime, starting their own project from the beginning.
Okay.
Or care to chime in, or you good?
Randy and I were talking earlier, and I guess the question that I had posed to him, which I think would be helpful for the public to hear, was why was this proposal chosen out of the six? Because the geotechnical report didn't really make any recommendations, but the city engineer did recommend this.
That's a fair question, ma'am. And so when the geotechnical report was put together, they listed it from highest cost to lowest cost. And of course, the highest cost was the $5 to $8 million option, and the lowest cost was the do nothing option, which cost us nothing. What I did is I went through it was I made my best professional engineering judgment on which project I thought would have the highest benefit to cost ratio, and I also made some assumption about what I thought would have the least aesthetic value. The 2 or 3 other possible projects which might have very similar mitigation characteristics to it are all vertical or near vertical walls, 8 feet in height, right at the edge of the travelway. And I think because that corridor is already very constrained for the traveling public, we've already had to narrow the travel lanes a little bit. That's why the speed is slowed through there. We had to accommodate putting a bikeway shoulder in there, and we had to put the concrete median barriers in there for safety. I think that having an 8-foot-high wall right next to that would be a very unpleasant experience, but that's just my impression. But that's where I came from when I decided that I would recommend a wire mesh slope laying flat on the slope. There's certainly the possibility that those things come vinyl coated, and we can get a vinyl coating that's a little bit closer to the natural colors that you have out there existing. And I think the other benefit of that one is that there's a possibility that because it's holding soil down there, that with it being watered over the years, there's a possibility for some plants to take root and for it to grow up. So it was the combination of cost benefit, a cost that struck me as reasonable, and what I thought would be the least aesthetic impact to the roadway as you were traveling it on either a bicycle or in a vehicle.
Okay. Council's pleasure on this? Anybody want to make a motion for the,
We need to move for a supplemental appropriation,
right, for $30,000?
$30,000 for the design of the wire mesh slope drapery for Ice House Hill.
Sir.
I second that.
Okay, so a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we made it through the consent calendar. All right, that brings us up to public hearing, which is consider appeal of the Planning Commission's approval of the number 8 Thomas permits, design permit EP 1-13 and grading permit EX 1-13 for development of approximately 5,110 square foot single-family home with associated grading of approximately 1,850 cubic yards on a ridgeline lot within the Brisbane Acres zoning district. And this is Manqua is the applicant owner. And so I'd like to ask the city attorney to give us an outline of how we're going to proceed from this point.
Mayor and council, thank you very much. I'm David Kahn, the city attorney. I wanted to outline the procedure that the council and the public will be following for this hearing this evening on the 8 Thomas appeal. The first step in the process is a staff report in which the staff will present the factual background information for the project and for the appeal. There will then be a short summary of the appeal issues by the two council members who initiated the appeal, Council members Miller and O'Connell. The applicant will have a chance to provide a full presentation and make arguments in support of the project. The public hearing will then be opened, and all members of the public who wish to speak and address the council and discuss the issues in the appeal and relevant facts will be allowed to do so. When the public hearing is completed, there will be council discussion and questions either of staff, the applicant, or other speakers if the council has additional questions. And when all those things have been accomplished, the council will then open up its discussion, deliberation, and will make a decision based on all of the oral, written evidence that's presented to it this evening, as well as what's in the record. When the council reaches the point of making a decision, there are several options the council has. The council can affirm the Planning Commission's decision approving the project. It can reverse the Planning Decisions Commission and deny the project, or it can modify the Planning Commission's decision with respect to certain conditions of approval. A fourth option would be to remand the project to the Planning Commission for further review and action by the Planning Commission consistent with any direction that the council might give to the Planning Commission. So those would be the four options. And that, in quick summary, is the procedure for the hearing this evening.
Okay, thank you, David. All right, at this time, I'd like to request staff report.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. As you indicated, the proposal is a design permit and grading permit to construct a two-story, about 5,100 square foot residence at 8 Thomas Avenue. It is designated a ridgeline lot within the Brisbane Acres zoning district and is subject to the design permit. The Planning Commission held public hearings regarding this project on October 10th and November 14th of last year, and unanimously approved by a vote of 4-0 the project on the November 14th meeting. Subsequent to the approval, the item was appealed, as was indicated earlier. And by way of quick background, the current proposal is not the first application that was processed before the city on this site. 2006, a slightly larger, approximately 5,500 square foot home, similar design, was approved by a variance V106. Approval of the variance at that time allowed for development of a ridgeline parcel, allowable lot coverage exceeding the 25% limit in the Brisbane Acres zone, and encroachment of the residence within the north side yard setback. That variance did expire prior to the issuance of a building permit, so those approvals are essentially null and void, no longer active. Also, subsequent to approval of the variance, the city adopted new zoning code provisions regulating ridgeline development. And the current application that's before you now is the first application in the city that's been subject to these new ridgeline requirements. So before we get into the details of the proposal, I just wanted to give a real quick background to the history of the ridgeline regulations. They're primarily based on a series of general plan policies that are spelled out in the staff report, and were also attached. A number of policies reference 16, 17, 83, a number of other programs addressing ridgeline protection, and a number of policies pertaining to private property rights and city development regulations. And the theme throughout, I think, both the previous regulations as well as the newly adopted ridgeline regulations was to strike a balance between protecting the ridgeline and mountain views for the public's benefit while recognizing ability of private property owners to develop their property within limits. And again, there were a number of practical difficulties under the pre-existing zoning regulations that essentially required that structures be located below ridgelines to preserve public views of the San Bruno Mountain State and County Park. All ridgeline developments were subject to a variance procedure. And there were a number of practical difficulties with this previous ordinance language. There was a demonstrated lack of clarity and level of uncertainty regarding the definition of ridgeline, which properties were subject to the regulations, what constituted a public view for purposes of the pre-existing ordinance. The reliance on a variance also raised certain challenges and concerns if a variance were to be denied, potentially depriving a private property owner the use of their property, and what issues that might raise for the city. On the basis of these concerns, the city undertook an amendment to the ridgeline ordinance in 2011, was adopted, and the ordinance presently in effect calls for the preservation of public views of San Bruno Mountain and County Park that are found to be of community-wide value as seen from the Bay Trail or Community Park. And the language really is intended to respond to a number of the previously noted concerns. The ordinance clearly identifies which private properties are identified as ridgeline parcels and subject to the provisions of the ordinance. It identifies the public views to be preserved, which are views of San Bruno Mountain State and County Park, as well as the public viewing locations from which these projects are to be evaluated. That would be from the Community Park and Bay Trail. City review is achieved through a design review process in lieu of a variance as the previous ordinance. While the amended ordinance does provide procedural clarity and includes specific findings for approval, it is recognized the process of determining whether or not a particular project complies with the ordinance language is a subjective decision on the part of the Planning Commission and or City Council based on a case-by-case analysis. Which is an extremely sensitive issue, obviously, as I think if you look through the record or listen to the hearings that the Planning Commission had. But the process of analyzing a specific application against specific findings and particular findings and making a decision is a common practice through the city's other design permits, variances, use permits. That is a process the Planning Commission does routinely as they make findings for projects consistent with the requirements of city ordinance. The other key provision of the new ordinance was the installation of story poles being a requirement. And I'm sure as everyone's seen, the story poles for 8 Thomas have been installed and remain in place. The intent of that was to allow everyone to have who's interested to have a first-hand view of the outline, the height of the building, the proposed building. So there was no required reliance on photo simulations or photographs. You know, everyone has the opportunity to review the story poles out in the field and draw their conclusions as to the implications of the proposal and its compliance with the ordinance findings. So the appeal, I'll just briefly, because I know the appellants will be discussing it, but raised 3 primary issues related to the application of the ridgeline ordinance and how it's applied and measured. So briefly went over the background of the ordinance and what is intended to achieve. So there are really three basic questions that were under consideration by the Planning Commission in their deliberations. Would the development result in view impacts on San Bruno Mountain State and County Park, as seen from Bay Trail or from the community park? The response was yes. The proposed story polls indicated that it would result in view impacts on San Bruno Mountain and State and County Park from some portions of the Bay Trail. And then would the public views of community-wide value be preserved? I think that was probably the point of most contention during the public hearing process. Is you had an evaluation. It was clear that portions of the park would be blocked, and most of the deliberations and testimony related to did that rise to a community-wide value, and would the community-wide values be preserved? And ultimately, the Planning Commission determined that the finding for approval could be made, and that community-wide values were preserved in this particular location. Another finding was, does the proposal take adequate steps in its design to preserve the views? And the Commission in their deliberations noted that the residence was reduced in size from the previously approved residence. The building height was reduced below the maximum allowed in the Brisbane Acre zone, and the roof line was kept at a relatively flat pitch. And those were considered design considerations that the applicant had attempted to undertake to minimize or view impacts. Other issue related to the home has an open courtyard that's proposed in the center of the residence, and there are issues raised regarding city regulations and whether that counts as floor area or lot coverage. The staff report has a very brief description of how those terms are defined by city ordinance. And in summary, the courtyard does not count as floor area for purposes of calculating maximum square footage allowed, or the floor area ratio of the structure, nor does the courtyard count toward lot coverage, which again, there's another zoning code provision that limits lot coverage in this zone to 25%. So that was sort of the response to that particular item. There are other issues related to the inclusion of public comments in the record. Any comments that were received prior to the Planning Commission hearings on this matter were provided to the Commission. I believe the city clerk has provided similar access to the council for all comments that have been received up to tonight's hearing. So with that, the staff recommendation is to uphold the Planning Commission's approval of the above referenced application per the findings and conditions set forth in the attached resolution DP 113 EX 113. And that concludes staff's comments.
All right. Thank you, John. So who wants to go first, Terry or Ray?
I guess I'll go first.
Okay, go ahead.
I did ask for this to be appealed to the council, and I felt that because it was a contentious decision and many people had conflicting views on whether it was the correct decision to make, I felt that it should be heard by the council so that everyone knew that it was coming from or had the approval of the council and was not just gone through the Planning Commission. I really respect all the work that the Planning Commission did and the work that the staff and the applicant did to come up with their plan and to submit it. But I do think that because it's the first application on the new, under the new Ridgeline ordinance, that it should be reviewed by the full council. I want everyone to be aware that I've looked at the documentation, and what comes out in this hearing I will review openly and fairly to the best of my knowledge and the best of my ability.
Okay, great.
Okay. Ditto. The only additional thing that I would add, the reason I, joined the appeal was that I did listen to the two hearings that were held before the Planning Commission, and during the course of my listening, it became evident to me that there was a considerable amount of confusion as to what the council's intent was. And it would seem to me that the only way to find that out is to ask the council in this kind of a process. And that's what I think the purpose of this is. And I would like to note that it seemed to me that not only was there a lot of confusion among different members of the public who had strong opposing views, but there was even some confusion, so far as I heard, also even on part of planning commissioners. Even though there was a unanimous vote, I know Commissioner Manier in particular was not happy with the ordinance and felt that there were some problems with it. At least that's what I heard him say. So it wasn't clear to me that the Planning Commission had a full understanding of what the council had in mind when this ordinance was passed. So I felt that, as Council Member Mayor Pro Tem Terry O'Connell said, that this is the first application under this new ordinance. And whatever is decided here, whatever people say, it is going to set a precedent. And so we really should understand what we're doing and why. And so that, to me, is the point of this. I do not, to reiterate what Terry said, I don't have a opinion on where we're going to come out on this. I just think there's a lot of confusion and we ought to sort it out and then try to come to a reasonable conclusion. And that's what we have, discussion and public hearing and presentation of all the facts and evidence and arguments that people can make. And I look forward to that.
Thank you, Ray. Okay, at this time I'm going to ask the applicant or applicant's representative to come up and present your project to the council. Just give us your name, please.
My name is Kevin Tran. I am the nephew of the applicant, and I would be one of the people who will be living in this family house.
Okay.
So I'm just going to keep this short. I don't have anything new to present to the council that's not already been presented to the commission and during my speech there or in the letters that we've written to the council to try to expedite this process because it is costing us financially and for in the case of my grandparents who would also be living with us physically, how long they would have. So I just want to reiterate that even if this were to be approved today, it would still take at least 2 years for this house to be built. And for at least for us, time is an issue in terms of our ability to financially build the house and our goal of having our grandparents be able to move in with us. So my grandparents move in with us, my uncle, my applicant's grandparents move in. And that really is our family's goal. It's just we are a very tight-knit family. We want everyone to be together. But based on just how it complies with city ordinances, we completely agree with what the commission has ruled. I mean, the commission, there was a little bit of confusion about the ordinance and how it was applied. I do understand that. However, there was what I believe to be a clarification. Now, we look at the design and if it significantly impacts public views of the San Bruno Mountain. And what they do found is that it blocks views of the apartment behind the house design. That sure it does, but that's not the San Bruno Mountain. It does not significantly hinder the public views of community-wide value. And thus, most of the issues we got from the meeting that day was most of the protests were due to private views, and how it would hinder private views from certain houses along the other side of the trail. And we do not feel those should be a part of the council or the commission's decision, and the commission did rule in our favor in terms that it is not a private view issue, it is a public view issue, and this house does not impact public views of community-wide value. And I just want to reiterate that this design does not require variance. It complies with all the city codes and ordinances without the need of any exceptions. So thank you, council members, for your time. I just wanted to reiterate that we do fully support what the commission has ruled before.
Okay, thank you. All right, before I open the public hearing, I just want to let folks know that we do have an ordinance that allows 5 minutes per speaker, but if you do need more time, I'd like to know before you start speaking. So I'm going to have city clerk keep time. So I'd like for folks to be as concise as possible. And I have currently about 8 slips.
May I make one comment?
Sure.
Mr. Mayor? In all fairness, I do want to state that I have talked to Luc Bouchard and to Beth Grossman and Storrs prior to the meeting, and the information that they shared with me has been included in the packet, in the general thoughts of it all.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. I'll declare the public hearing open, and first slip I have is Jeff Wexler.
Hello, council members. My name's Jeff Wexler, and I live on Monterey Street in the flat part of Brisbane. And I wanted to talk about a couple points related to Thomas Hill today. I don't think I'll go more than 5 minutes. We'll try to keep it like that. So I've lived on Monterey Street for 18 years now, and I have a wife and 3 kids there. And I've been kayaking for the last 7 years. So I don't know if you've seen me put the kayak on the car, and I kayak around Sierra Point, Oyster Point, and the Brisbane Marina. And I look up from the bay waters and the fishing pier at the Brisbane Marina, and you can see right up past Thomas Hill. You can see the city. You can see the San Bruno Mountain Park. And I love those views of the city. I got some great pictures from there. And I also hike on the Powerline Trail pretty regularly. And I can look down with my kids and I can say, hey, that's where I go kayaking down. You can see like the little lagoon, the little shoreline lagoon by the Brisbane Pier. And I'm concerned that this is going to impact and set a precedent for blocking those public views. So this is the first time I've spoken in front of the City Council, so please bear with me. But I want you to know that I appreciate your judgment and expertise regarding the community-wide values that are talked about in the Brisbane General Plan, and I support those. And I also want to make a point about preserving the public views and corridors of San Bruno Mountain and the Bay views. Many of these things have already been mentioned. I want the City Council to know that as a Brisbane citizen, I support the language that is already part of the general plan, and I want to just really quickly mention Chapter 5, land use. The City of Brisbane will preserve the mountain for its own sake, and as the symbol of the unique character and identity of the city, incorporate and reflect the natural environment as an integral part of land use. So I think that just wanted to remind the council about that. And more details concerning the issues under discussion today regarding Thomas Hill. I know that you've also gone through the policies 16 through 19 that were part of the programs regarding bay and mountain setting. And I just wanted to mention policy 17, which struck a chord with me, which states preserving the ridge lines and hilltops in their open state. Prohibit land use changes that would result in development that would break the natural ridge line. And you know, you get that San Bruno Mountain ridgeline imprinted in your mind after a while. You know what our town, where it sits in the mountain, and that's really important. Skipping down, I'm not going to take the time to read the other ones, but Program 18A says in conjunction with land use development applications, encourage options that minimize grading and transformation of the landform and fit comfortably with the topology. And then the last one I'll just mention in the interest of time is 19B, which says consider amendments to the zoning ordinance to provide for site plan review to assure that identified vistas and public view corridors, like the ones I looked up to the mountain and from the mountain down to the bay, that they remain accessible for public enjoyment. And the review should evaluate building placement, height, and bulk. So most importantly, I have a feeling that these decisions today will set a precedent for the future of development on Thomas Hill and in the Brisbane Acres. And so I chose to address the City Council because of the important precedent that this decision to allow the building of structure on 8 Thomas Hill will have on future ridgeline building projects in the city. And I hope that the guidelines described in the ridgeline ordinance are particularly important, and I ask you to explain and evaluate in more detail how to correctly apply building codes to current and future proposals for permits to be compliant with the general goals and the values of the majority of Brisbane citizens. And in regard, and reading over the ridgeline ordinance, I just want to point out Section 2, which has already been mentioned, which maintains public views by requiring stepped roof lines to match ridgeline topography, locating the home on lower elevations of the site, changing the orientation of the building to lower the impact of its profile on public views. And in conclusion, when entering or exiting Brisbane on San Bruno Avenue on the south side of town, I hope that I'll be able to look proudly on any structure or any future structure that is built on 8 Thomas Avenue. And as a Brisbane citizen, see a tasteful piece of architecture that is a visual improvement to our city. I want the city supervisors to set an important precedent that any other houses that are built along the ridge in the future enhance the natural beauty of our town and do not become an eyesore that obstructs views of our natural surroundings or physically cuts the city off from its connection to the bay or to San Bruno Mountain. I thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
Next person I have is Ali Saifan. And if I butcher anybody's name, please straighten me out when you come up. So, Ali, how are you?
Mr. Mayor, good. Council members, my name is Ali Saifan. I live at 811 Humboldt Road in Brisbane. Way back, I was looking to actually buy maybe about 5 properties on the ridgeline. My wife was just kind of tempting me to go and buy one so we can build a house in there. Looked at the ordinance and things like that. Said, no, that will not work for us. And actually, I looked at this lot in particular, and I said no. I just didn't want it because it really conflicts with the ridgeline ordinance. The last meeting in here, I spoke, and it seemed to, the house from the graphics, computer graphics were actually displayed here. It looks like really it not only it covers San Bruno Mountain, but also it actually, from a personal point of view, it covers my building up there, at 71 Thomas. But my building is, it's personal, and it really is not that important to many people in here. The thing is really the ridge line is very important. And I was looking at those properties all along the ridge line. To buy and put a house up there, it has great views, the whole works. We just rejected the idea at the time. Now, we have an ordinance. And the last meeting they were saying, oh, you can see the mountain if you actually sat down on the trail. You have to sit down and you can see the mountain, or stand up, you can see the mountain. The fact of the matter is, this ordinance is there. It's already, agreed to, and whether you're sitting down, bending down, fully standing up, you're still going to have a blockage of that mountain. It doesn't matter how, with this house. So I would say, you fracture the ordinance now, and there are so many people waiting on the wings, which both these properties pay at reasonable price. They're going to come back and say, oh, you allowed so-and-so to build the house there, and it's a block in the mountain, it's okay. So the ordinance will end up being so liquidated that, or so liquefied that it's meaningless. So I would suggest, that to look at it objectively and keep ridge clear of any of these things, of any structures. Whether you're sitting down, standing up, on the trail, you should be able to see the mountain. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Okay, next person I have, Dana Dilworth.
Hi, Mr. Mayor and council members. I got caught up in the Ridgeline ordinance thing too, but I realize there's a big omission in all of the discussions that have gone on, which is this is Brisbane Acres. Brisbane Acres has to be treated differently. This isn't in the bowl of our town. And Brisbane Acres, you mentioned, only allows 25% lot coverage, but also requires 40% of the planting area to be conserved habitat. And when I look at the landscaping plan, I wonder where avocado, lime, lemon, sour cherry, magnolia, etc., fall within the category of habitat and habitat preservation. Yes, I did see the redbud and one toyon, but really, seriously, I hate to say this, concerned about the interior courtyard. And I am somebody who for 10 years searched to buy an Eichler home which has the interior courtyard. And so conceptually I love the idea of being able to go from room to room through a passageway like a garden. However, once again, this is HCP land. And so what should be limited to 25% coverage, when people push that coverage all the way out and then keep the open space open. And in this case, it's an open space ordinance, not an open area ordinance. And so I'm wondering how this plan fits in a Brisbane Acres, because I don't see any contribution to the HCP. Other people pay $800 a year for the right to kill endangered species. So I'm concerned about the precedent of allowing somebody to push all their walls out as far out as they can and conserve the interior open space, because that's what's going to be asked on the Baylands for sure. And if you don't make a clarification between open space and open area and make it certain that, especially in the Brisbane Acres, open space is important. Open space is required. Open space should be for the preservation of habitat. And we're all talking about how high and how big something is when you haven't even come up with, in my opinion, the right focus on what this land is. And I know Jamil was in the hearings back when we were working on our general plan, because I couldn't figure out why he was going to all those hearings, because there was another person in Brisbane that would sit through all those hearings. And I know you know that about the Brisbane Acres because he owns land in the Brisbane Acres. So he was very concerned about how the language went down for Brisbane Acres, but it still has a requirement of 40% of the area for open space. And I don't see any of that in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Next slip I have is Danny Ames.
Danny Ames, 690 Sarah Point, about 30 years, I guess. And I hike up the mountain almost every other day. I actually go to the top, and I'm in the San Mateo newspaper because they caught me one time, and there was a 50-acre fire that took place. And I'll tell you, the years that I've been hiking, I've noticed almost 100% increase in people that I see taking advantage of the mountain. And we're seeing more people kayaking out on the water. And so, I'd like to address the fact that there's going to be a future impact as well, not just, homes going in and dotting the line, but also people enjoying the recreational uses of this area that we all like. I feel this project is not within the spirit of the general plan and held community-wide values, and I'll tell you why. First, if it were strictly, held to the spirit and we were really hard-nosed about it, this house would only be a story high, if that much, and it would still require public input as well. I think we need to preserve our view lines, and I'm up to discussing it and modifying the project, but I think the project in its current form is just not, it violates, I think, the general plan policies. There was a survey given to residents of Brisbane. The question is, in your opinion, what is the most important problem that Brisbane residents will have to face and try to solve over the next 10 years? Respondents: development of lands currently vacant to make certain they contribute and not diminish the quality of life. Managing growth to keep our independence. The mountain. Save it. I believe that the community-wide values are echoed in the general plan and clearly reflect the community sentiments. And I think we need to apply those sentiments to this project. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Danny. Next up I have is Storrs Home.
Sure, if you could hold off showing, but I'll say when to. So I think I should be at 5 minutes, give or take a half minute or so. Okay. I have 3 slides to show as we go along. Honorable members of the City Council, thanks so much for looking at this ordinance and considering how it should be implemented to reflect the values of our city. Beth and I first got involved with 8 Thomas 9 years ago. Seems like a long time now, because our private views were affected. We quickly realized it was a much bigger issue. It was and is about how as a city we balance the rights of landowners with our city's sense of protecting and being protected by the mountain. The city itself was incorporated somewhat as a defense against overdevelopment of the mountain. We have since been active in discussions of 88 Thomas, 99 Thomas, San Diego Court. We see this as a larger issue. Our private views will be impacted by whatever house is built on 8 Thomas. The real question is whether the house that's built there sets the proper precedent for the future ridgeline development of Brisbane Acres. The key element of the Ridgeline Ordinance, which I'm sure you've all read, is that the design must preserve public views that are of community-wide value. What are Brisbane's values? We are a city that values independence and quirkiness and different housing designs and different housing colors. We are also a city that values a small town feel and being surrounded by the mountain. As a city, we are lucky because we have a general plan, a document that the citizens and the City Council adopted in 1994 to reflect our values and guide how our city grows in the future. So if you would be willing to put up the first slide. I'm just going to show 2 slides. There were 6 slides in my talk, in my letter. But basically, I just want to make it clear that the present design does not preserve public views of the mountain.
over a large swath of the Bay Trail. In this first image, we see that 20 feet of the proposed design extends into the mountain park. This is the side closest to San Bruno Avenue. This is the side that will close off this entrance to our town. Moreover, the overall height of the proposed design dwarfs the apartment building behind it. So if we could put the second image up. In the second image, we see that the proposed design blocks more of the upper ridge than the apartment building. It blocks the ridge line near the radio towers and blocks a lot of the ridge that's exposed above the apartment building. 88 Thomas, which I have sketched probably incorrectly, but and I put next to it, was redesigned in order to maintain public views of the park. Moreover, it steps down towards San Bruno Avenue in a way that echoes the topography. During the hearing on the present 8 Thomas, the Planning Commission seemed to interpret this ordinance as saying the proposed design will preserve public views of community-wide value if this one single home doesn't have a large impact on the overall vista from the Bay Trail. This is not the correct way to preserve a vista. No one single home can have a large impact on a vista, unless it was the size of VWR. So if we could go to the third. The correct way to preserve a vista or a view corridor is to apply the ordinance in a way that the sum of all homes that can be built preserves the public vista or view corridor. If 8 Thomas is allowed to extend 20 feet into the park, then 88 Thomas can be redesigned to extend 20 feet into the park. Moreover, the homes slated for 99 Thomas can also extend into the park. I'm sure I've made mistakes in this drawing, but I've tried to capture what the homes that have been proposed for those sites. I don't think this public view of the ridgeline reflects our community-wide values of maintaining a small town feel and keeping the sense of being surrounded by the mountain. How does the general plan guide us? It tells us what our community values are. It clearly says that the mountain is a central part of what makes Brisbane unique, and it is woven through the general plan. The mountain figures prominently in the goals for 4 of the 13 sections of the general plan. How are we asked to build in the general plan? Policy 17 asks that ridgelines be kept in their open state. Policy 18 asks to respect the topography of the mountain in design and construction. A glorious home can be built at 8 Thomas that does reflect the topography of the mountain and preserves public views of community-wide value. Please ask the Planning Commission and Planning Department to work with the applicant to build a house that agrees with the community-wide values captured in the general plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Storrs. Next slip I have is David Schooley.
Council members, Mayor, folks. I've lived here and worked around San Bruno Mountain for the last 45 years, just about. And that intensity and care for a place has been something so important. In those 60 years ago, 1960 and 1970, was when Brisbane was really out to build and grow. Many council members were out for that energy. After the battle to save San Bruno Mountain and the things that passed after that, a change has happened through this town. It's been growing, and that intensity and care is something that perhaps the rest of the planet is now beginning to look at the energy we're doing to ourselves on this planet and to ourselves. Massive growth is something very frightening for all of us. And, for example, a small town called Port Costa in Carquinez Straits has stopped building. They don't want growth. They've kept a smaller town than this one and kept it going. And so I'm so grateful for what Brisbane and its council members and its CARES have been doing up to now. And here we're facing another slight of a change here, and that is to move forward. And I think all of us are facing a slight period of time. The powers throughout the United States, people in poverty, people in richness above, and growth is growing in all directions. And this is like another move for the growth of Brisbane. And all of you have been careful of that energy and that time that we're doing. And I hope that this movement and this thought about putting the view of San Bruno Mountain plus the edge of the Northeast Ridge or other part of Brisbane going up toward the mountain. This is an idea, looking at the place where we are and where our young kids are going to grow up and see for this whole area, something critical for all of us. And here, maybe it's something small, maybe it's a beginning first question about what's going on, but I do feel that that is so important for Thomas Hill. And just to put as a memory, Thomas Hill, if you remember, was a possible park. We had hoped that it might be a park in those days. Didn't work. They found the bones of 3 Native Americans in Thomas Hill. And it's like an area up there, an unknown, a movement, a part of the mountain, a part of the acres. And this is us looking at the land around our small town and what it means for us and what our future is and energies. And here we're coming up to another point on that spot. And I'm grateful, very grateful, that there are people making movements and opening up the door and questioning as to what is going to happen for all of us. There's not too much we can prepare or say what's going on, but I just hope that everybody's listening carefully to a movement in our town and a protection and a care for a small town that has survived so far and is thinking of our far future. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Next person I have is Michelle Salmon.
Michelle Salmon, Brisbane resident. Normally, I don't lack for my own words to say, but tonight I want to read some excerpts from a letter from Michael Woods that you all received. And he's a fairly new resident of Brisbane, but he expressed even more eloquently than I can of some of the things from the last 2 hearings. And so I'm just going to kind of highlight some of them. And these are his words, but I agree with them. I do believe that I need to object to the decision as well as the process, and believe that your careful review of the decision and the process leading to the decision will cause you to reach the same conclusion that I have, namely that the Planning Commission made an error and or followed an improper analysis when approving the current design of 8 Thomas Avenue. While the record includes a number of deficiencies in addition to those I'm highlighting here, I do want to give you reasons why I believe that an error was made. The staff report errs in several respects. The most glaring to me is the apparent idea that some portions of the Bay Trail are more or less important than others of the Bay Trail, other parts of the Bay Trail. The report asserts that the envelope of the home, as identified by the story poles, would have a limited impact for 700 feet, 14% of the Bay Trail segment. Further, the report asserts, without providing the metric used, that the impacts were not perceived as significant. It is first important to note that the report thereby does acknowledge that the proposed site development does block views of the state and county park. The report asserts that the most significance of this blocking is somehow less important because the portions where the parklands are most visible have existing development, including a visible apartment building. Surprisingly, the report suggests that the view of elements situated within the parklands, power lines, radio facilities, is somehow reason to advocate for blocking the view of parklands. These are two reasons of how the staff report fails to properly take the Ridgeline Ordinance into account. The vistas of San Bruno Mountain, enjoyed by hikers, bikers, fisherfolk, and other manner of Brisbane visitors along the Bay Trail, is not consumed at selected disconnected points. Every person, that is 100%, who starts at one end of the trail and ends at the other end of the trail will experience this 14% degradation. The Ridgeline Ordinance is not written in this way, and the analysis that concluded that these presumptions and that rely on these data has to be suspect. The parkland includes visible power lines and radio facilities is a fact, but should not be relevant to the investigation. An observer observing the beauty of San Bruno Mountain that includes a portion that may have such a structure is still observing the mountain while having an option to overlook power lines or radio facilities. Building a barrier between the observer and the parklands deprives the viewer of the ability to see that part of the mountain obscured by the barrier. There no longer is the option to observe while overlooking. The report supports such a misguided interpretation of the ordinance. Several commissioners voiced some position that I did not believe was supported. The commissioners seemed to view that there was some requirement that the owners of 8 Thomas must be allowed to develop the site. It is my understanding that the burden is on the homeowner to propose a site development plan that meets all the requirements except those legally accepted, and that the commission is not under any obligation to accept something that is close because it could not perceive any other option. Commissioner Doe made many good points in explaining her reasoning and rationale in considering the merits of the proposed development of 8 Thomas Avenue. However, in at least one respect, I believe she erred. Namely, Commissioner Doe went through the Ridgeline Ordinance and make inquiries of staff and architect whether any of the specifically identified mitigations from the ordinance had been employed. Based upon some anecdotal assertions that there had been some modifications to the design of the house to address some of the mitigation methods of the ordinance, Commissioner Doe appeared to conclude that the homeowner had done everything that could be asked except perhaps varying the roofline. This is a plain error in construction of this ordinance, and therefore the conclusion is contrary to law. The ordinance is only permissive in identifying 4 mitigation methods that may be employed by the Commission. It does not say that these methods are exhaustive. I believe that it is ultimately up to the homeowner to find a viable solution, and if none can be found that preserves the public views, then the development project cannot be authorized. Commissioner Manure, on the record of the video, represented that he believed the ordinance was not subject to interpretation, that it was illegal, and I understood him to say that he was ignoring it, which is also what I understood personally at that meeting, and I was very offended by that. I do not believe that the correct interpretation, I do not believe that that is a correct interpretation. It is certainly should not be an interpretation of a member of the Planning Commission in failing to try to uphold a relevant ordinance. Commissioner Cunningham discounted the people who spent hours at various meetings for an opportunity to be heard on this important issue. Particularly in the October 2013 meeting I attended, she stated that people opposed the development were only doing so because of personal interest unrelated to the merits of the enforcement of the ordinance. These ad hominem attacks ultimately failed to address the merits of the argument that the proposed development negatively impacts the views of San Bruno Mountain from the Bay Trail. Further, she inquired about the composition of the substratum, etc., etc. The inquiry should not have stopped simply because the Commission was unable to determine how to preserve public views of San Bruno Mountain. Other methods are available, and the burden would have been placed back on the homeowner. And she goes on to talk. It goes on to talk about acknowledge the proposed developments impacts the views and community-wide values. A very important question did not appear to be asked by the Planning Commission after accepting that the building would have an impact on public views of San Bruno Mountain that are of community-wide value. Namely, does the building preserve those public views? I don't believe that the Planning Commission addressed the concept of preservation of these public views. In one sense, perhaps the negative of this was investigated, whether anyone opposing the development could prove that the development would degrade the public view. The staff report does this by asserting on page 5, et cetera, because the view's impacts were not considered significant, the public views were substantially preserved. Substantially, but not completely, as the ordinance states. The report further takes a too limited mitigation set in representing that the placement, height, bulk, and landscaping take adequate measures to preserve the public view. In one representative point, the staff confirmed to a questioner, that questioner was me, but Dana brought this up also, that the 8 Thomas development plan included an interior exposed atrium. If they got rid of the atrium, they could reduce the footprint of the house. Anyway, it goes on to talk about many things, but I'll just skip down to the bottom because I don't want to take up too much of your time. A reduction of the exterior envelopment, removal of the interior atrium, and reduction of roof height is but one possible method by which the bulk of the project would reduce the obstruction of the public views and should be investigated before approving the development. So when we talk about public and private views, one of the reasons why we have a ridgeline ordinance, it was one of the few ways that we could try to codify the protection of public views and the values expressed in Brisbane's general plan. It's not perfect, but it was the best we could do. And while you talk about public views and private views and standing here or standing there or standing there, you still have to look at the whole. And because we've declared that standing here and this view should be protected, and this one house wouldn't make a difference. But it does, because there's the ripple effect. Because we've determined that protecting the view from here would protect the view from other places as well. And I attended those meetings where we worked on the Ridgeline Ordinance. And that's why this morning I got up early and I was looking out the window and I went, oh God, it's another beautiful sunrise in Brisbane. Okay, and one wouldn't think that my personal views would be obstructed by the building of this house. But actually that's not true. And my private view is the same pretty much as everybody on my side of the hill. And so I brought these pictures to share. This first one was just kind of like the overview, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it in a slide because it was much more beautiful than this. And I just had my little Canon camera, and I out there in my pajamas, and I kind of focused down. Next one, Sherry. And lo and behold, there's the apartment house on Thomas Avenue. That's right below it that the owner here mentioned. And had we had a Ridgeline Ordinance at the time that this was built, it might not have been built. It might have been built lower. But it's already there now, and that ordinance wasn't in place then. But we do have an ordinance now. Can I see the next slide, please? And this is kind of part of the Ridgeline view, a close-up of what we were looking at in the first one. And you can see those big houses that were built up on Tulare Street kind of infringe a little bit. But you can still see through the eucalyptus trees. You can still get the outline of the ridge. And if you go back to the first picture, you don't really notice that badly that those houses are infringing on the ridgeline. But every one of them takes a little bite out of the picture. And so while I'm not standing on the Bay Trail when I'm taking this picture, I do go on the Bay Trail a lot, and I do drive along Sierra Point Parkway and go to the marina at least once a week. And I do look at that view. And maybe to someone else that bite isn't something missing, but to me it is. And you take another bite and another bite and another bite, and pretty soon it's not Brisbane anymore, and it's not San Bruno Mountain anymore that people see. It's just a wall of houses. And as much as I feel for these people wanting to build their dream house to house their entire family, every everyone's rights only go so far as to extend that they don't burst someone else's rights. And it's like a bunch of soap bubbles together. And when one person's soap bubble gets so big that all the other bubbles around it pop, well, that's really not quite fair. And that's why we have the Ridgeline View Ordinance, is to protect the views for everybody as best we can within the law. And therefore, I feel that you should send this back, have them redesign the house. They can still have a good house. They can still have a great house. My God, it's Brisbane. It's beautiful. So many people come here and they say, I love it here. I love it here. Well, if you love it here, then help protect the way that it is. I have lived here all my life. My mother grew up here. We've worked really hard to preserve the mountain in Brisbane, and we've sacrificed a lot. Look how much your family sacrificed. Look how much mine has. And yours, and yours, and yours, and yours now. You know? And it's worth fighting for. We have a treasure in San Bruno Mountain. And that's why people want to come here. But why would we destroy the very thing that we're coming here for, which is the beauty of our surrounding mountain? So I think we need to do everything to honor the ordinance, uphold the ordinance, and send this back for a redesign. Thank you.
Michelle. Dan Carter.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and the council members. Thank you for your service as always. We have a planning commission that you guys have appointed, and they come and they put a lot of long hours into what they do, and I know you guys appreciate that, like I appreciate what you guys do. And I think to think that their time isn't valuable and they didn't do their due diligence, which it sounds like some people think, I think is wrong. I think that these are very well-thought people, very educated people, and I think they did a real hard job on looking at this a couple times. And I think we need to respect what they came up with, and I really appreciate what Councilmember Terry said earlier about the reason that she wanted to look at it is because this is the first time that something in the acres has come up in this new Ridgeline ordinance. I think that helped me understand why after 2 times they approved it, then you guys let an appeal go through, because I was concerned about that, but that makes sense. And I appreciate that diligence. I know that just because this house is being considered right now, that that doesn't mean everything that comes up on the Ridgeline will go through the Planning Commission and will automatically be passed. I know each thing in Brisbane, and that's what I appreciate about it. Even when I built my house, I went to the city, and they were very good with working with me about, here's our parameters, here's what you need. If you need a variance, here's how it goes. And they did everything in their power to let me know what I needed to do. And I kind of went to the city first, which a lot of people don't do, and said, hey, what can I do to build a house here? And they worked with me well. So when these other ones comes up, when other ones come up, they're going to be separate and individual from this one. So I'm just considering this one on its own merits and what I think that they have done as far as the Planning Commission. I think we need to respect that a lot. There's a lot of houses that have been built in Brisbane lately, and I know this is separate because it's in the acres. I appreciate all my neighbors out here, and that's what I appreciate about Brisbane is we're friends and stuff, and we can have different opinions, and I think everybody makes a difference in Brisbane. One voice actually can be heard. So I appreciate you guys giving me time to hear mine, but I believe that you should respect the Planning Commission's decision on this, and their voice should be heard in this one.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Mike Glenn, next.
Good evening, council members. My name is Mike Glenn. I'm a property owner here in Brisbane. I currently live in Burlingame. The ordinance is not a perfect tool that the Planning Commission had to work with, but it's their interpretation had to be a little subjective. Looking at the house, it is a big home, no doubt, but it's a little unfair to expect the applicant to go back and redesign the house, because I think everybody knows the costs that are involved in that. It's not an easy thing. The carrying cost of the property and architectural fees and whatnot. And burying it further below ground, there's nothing environmentally friendly about excavating mountainsides. We can see that up on the ridge with the new homes. So, I mean, it's not perfect, but I do believe that the Planning Commission got it right. They spent a lot of time on it, and being on the trail. And if you take it literally, it does not block the mountain, to a great degree. Of course you can see it, but you can see almost anything from the Bay Trail. And I think we need to respect the Planning Commission and the hard work they put into it. And they were put under a lot of pressure, as you guys well know. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next one, I have Beth Grossman.
Honorable members of the City Council, thank you for considering this appeal and discussing how the Ridgeline Ordinance should be implemented in order to reflect the values of our city. This is the first ordinance that I know of to use the concept of community-wide value, and no document outlines this idea better than the general plan. Our community committed more than 100 public meetings and a citywide vote to adopt our general plan that spells out our responsibilities as stewards to San Bruno Mountain and our commitment to preserving the mountain setting. This is our Constitution. And here we are at a critical point, presented with the opportunity to set a precedent for the way that we as a community want to see the Brisbane Acres developed. This discussion is not about photography or how cameras capture a view or even personal views. This is about a special piece of land designated as part of the Brisbane Acres at the entrance to our town. This is about how development on ridgelines in the acres, and specifically on Thomas Hill, how that will occur. This is about how our public view corridors and vistas should be maintained to reflect our community-wide values. For one example of the importance the mountain plays in the character of the city, we need only to look at the goal for Chapter 5 of the General Plan on Land Use, which several people have mentioned. I'll quote again, "The city of Brisbane will preserve the mountain for its own sake and as the symbol of the unique character and identity of the city. Incorporate and reflect the natural environment as an integral part of land use." We appreciate the City Council now has this important opportunity to represent our community by describing how we intend this ordinance to be implemented. The precedent set by this decision will determine how the 12 future homes slated for Thomas Hill, as well as other homes in the acres on ridgeline lots, are designed. The house at A. Thomas will sit atop San Bruno Avenue at the entrance to our town. We hope that this home will be designed to fit with the small town character of Brisbane, nestled in the arms of San Bruno Mountain. We urge you, our City Council, to uphold the appeal and find that the current design for A. Thomas Avenue does not preserve public views of the San Bruno Mountain State and County Park of community-wide value as required by the Ridgeline Ordinance. The only way to preserve a vista is to apply the requirements to each home so that when many homes are viewed together, the vista is not largely affected. The vista of this ridgeline and San Bruno Mountain is the view that everyone who drives up 101 from the peninsula and from SFO sees, and it's a beautiful gateway to the entire Bay Area. When people drive past South San Francisco, they're greeted by the iconic industrial city letters on Sign Hill and the housing sprawl that reflects the values of past decades. Alternatively, Thomas Hill and the vista of our majestic mountain is Brisbane's iconic natural welcome to our town. 5 miles long, San Bruno Mountain is the largest contiguous open space parkland within a metropolitan area. Brisbane now has the opportunity to make a decision that reflects the current values of preserving an open vista and encouraging responsible, environmentally compatible development in the Brisbane Acres. Do we want to look back at Thomas Hill 10 years from now and say, what happened? What happened to our precious mountain vista? We request that any development on a ridgeline in the Brisbane Acres make every effort to preserve the views of the San Bruno Mountain State and County Park. It's the responsibility of the owner to research the size and the height of the home that can fit on each lot while preserving public views and design accordingly. We already have a model for the application of this new ordinance if we look to how 88 Thomas was evaluated under the previous ordinance. From start to finish, it took about 3 months to have an approved design. The city pointed out where and by how much the proposed house blocked views of the mountain. The Planning Commission engaged in a full design review. They asked that the design be modified to reflect the topography of the ridgeline and to preserve the public views of the mountain. The applicant was willing to modify the design. What resulted were plans for a house with glorious views of the bay that nestled into the mountain. The story poles at 8 Thomas clearly show that the present design does not preserve views of San Bruno Mountain State and County Park from 700 feet along the Bay Trail. The negative effect of the proposed house is approximately twice that of the existing apartment building. And the massive envelope of this 5,100 square foot house visually closes the only southwestern view corridor from the bay to the bay from inside Brisbane. We believe that an exquisite house with expansive views of the bay can be built on the property. But the owner must design a home that agrees with the Ridgeline Ordinance and is in harmony with the existing hillside. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, next slip I have is John Christopher Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Honorable City Council. My name is John Christopher Burr, and I am proud to be a lifelong resident of Brisbane. It's my understanding that this is a part of the acres, and I think what this highlights is the city's giving up too early on preserving the acres. They at one time were rapidly buying acres that had significant habitat values, and this apparently has habitat value. And they were going around acquiring acres and acquired like 50 of them, I think, so far. And this would have been, I think, an ideal candidate for acquisition and preservation. But the city decided, gee, let's just kind of forget about that for now. And I think that was a big mistake. I think that you should go back and revitalize that program and strengthen it by Levinson and some other properties around that need saving. Now, since it is an acre, this was originally carved up in the acreage by the Crocker interests, the crooks, who were living with the continuing fraud that they initiated back then, and it really works a hardship on the owners who bought these acres, because they're not in compliance with the Subdivision Map Act, which was passed in, I believe, 1927, aimed at people like Crockers to prevent fraud, which was occurring on innocent buyers. They were representing that all the infrastructure was in, and schools were in, and parks were in, and everything was in, and the public would buy these acres and lay down their life savings. They'd come out to California and find out there was nothing there. Paper roads like we have in the acres. No infrastructure, no sewer, no water, no nothing.
Let's focus on 8 Thomas.
Well, this is 8 Thomas. It's in the acres, and so we have this continuing fraud. So I think it's a good thing that Brisbane could possibly help landowners that have been defrauded in the acres by purchasing it from and preserving it as open space. So I just wanted to mention the continuing fraud. Now, it's my understanding here that that there's been something that the city has actually adopted a so-called mitigated negative declaration under the California Environmental Quality Act. And in order for that to happen, you have to have no impacts left. None. And here there are impacts that have not been mitigated and won't be mitigated. So a mitigated negative declaration is totally inappropriate here. Moreover, you have to prove it. And there's been no substantial proof here. the evidence, the substantial evidence, goes completely the other way, and you've got enough substantial evidence in front of you right now to create a fair argument, which means you have to do an environmental impact report, a full one. So there is no environment. Moreover, you've got endangered species here, which automatically ought to generate an environmental impact report. Certainly not a mitigated negative declaration or any kind of negative declaration. Plus, because it is endangered species habitat, I don't think that any of the Endangered Species Act has been complied with here. I don't think this applicant is a signatory to the HCP agreement. I don't think that they have done anything for permit purposes and gotten a 10A kill permit. You've got all these barriers here that they're legal barriers and would stop any development hole in its tracks. If you go up there and start messing with that, that's a $50,000 fine every day that goes on. And Brisbane could enforce that if they choose to, and get a substantial fee for that. So $50,000 a day for destroying endangered species habitat is pretty significant. I don't know if anybody wants to risk doing that. So violating the Endangered Species Act is pretty serious. So we have no environmental impact statement under federal law. We have no environmental impact report under California law. What you do have is the very powerful tool of the Subdivision Map Act, which you could actually say we want half of this as park, or we want a lot of goodies as part of the as part of mitigation by using the tools of the Subdivision Map Act, which I think we should be using anyway, because with redevelopment gone, this is the way to get things done. This is the way it was done before redevelopment laws were in existence. This is the way many projects were done in California, and it didn't burden the public or burden the schools like redevelopment did. So I think, given those things, you've got lots of barriers here, lots of legal barriers. I don't think that this is. You should uphold the appeal and say go back to the drawing board. You haven't complied with the law. Moreover, just having conflicts with the general plan should be enough to generate require an environmental impact report in and of itself. And you've heard lots of testimony, lots of good evidence here tonight. Lots of substantial evidence that there's a conflict here. So between the general plan and this proposed project, and let's face it, it's not a good project. It's not good for the town. It's good for one person maybe, and it's not good for the public. So I urge you to follow the law, require environmental impact reports, compliance with the Endangered Species Act. This is your duty to uphold the law, and I hope you'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, John, thank you. Next slip I have is Luke Bouchard.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. If you'll allow me 2 moments, I'd like to connect this computer to be able to display some images.
How much time do you need, Luke? How much time do you need?
I'll try to keep it at the 5-minute mark. That seems to be the standard. I'm going to pull this back, if I may. Don't want to break anything. Second, you can dim the lights, they'll help me. There you go, thank you. So what I'd like to do, if I may, is focus our attention on the core of why we're here. This project, as proposed, as far as I can understand, complies to the letter of every measurable objective measure placed before it. Maximum height, maximum square footage, setbacks, so forth and so on. Absolutely everything is compliant to the letter and the spirit of every applicable requirement as documented, objective requirement. There's no variance being requested as far as this project is concerned. There's one issue, and one issue only as far as I know, that requires that a design permit be issued by the Planning Commission. And I believe it is to be read as follows. This is an excerpt, but the language is verbatim from the so-called Ridgeline Ordinance in effect today. Planning Commission shall find that the building's placement, height, bulk, and landscaping will preserve those public views. Not all public views, but those public views indicating a specificity. The San Bernardino Mountain State and County Park as seen from the community park, the Bay Trail along the Brisbane Lagoon and Sierra Point shorelines that are found to be of community-wide value. We're in subjective land, whether we like it or not. The difficulty with that is now that this is being appealed, the body under whose purview the subjectivity of the application of this law has been placed, which is the Planning Commission, is somewhat extracted from it. And here we are in a quasi-judicial hearing here tonight. I'd like to note that the Brisbane Municipal Code does not offer a definition of the public views that are of community-wide value, and there's no guideline on how the Planning Commission is supposed to find such community-wide values. And there's not a test, there's not a standard to be applied. So if the speed limit is 60 miles an hour, you've got a measurable thing that you can issue a citation if somebody exceeds the speed limit. If you say simply drive safely, well, that's open for interpretation. Just an analogy here, but we are in subjective territory, whether we like it or not. The Planning Commission, over the course of 2 full meetings, found that this project indeed preserves those public views of San Bernardino Mountain that are found to be of community-wide value. Not everybody agrees with that, that's for sure. But those who don't agree, who say we should tell the applicant to go back to the drawing board and come up with something that fits. Well, we're sending them shadow boxing. Where's the target? Right? Would anybody on the Planning Commission or the City Council or anybody be willing to take a pen and go to those drawings and say, build exactly this? I'll approve you? I don't think that's the process. So the other thing I'd like to show here, my apologies if I don't find it right away. Oh, found it right away. Is this is a Google Earth view of various points. So points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then if I move a little bit to the right, there's a gentleman earlier who talked about views from the bay, kayaking. The closest I got without getting wet was point 7, 8, and 9 right here. I'd like to highlight some of those views for us tonight. And, oh, I was in the right place. So, from point, here's the first one, point number 3. So let me go back here. Point number 3 being right here, looking almost due west towards the site of the project. This is, my apologies for shifting around, this is what you see. This is what you see when you zoom in by a factor of approximately, I'd say you're north of 15-fold here. And you see that the story poles, if connected, would incrementally obstruct views of what's behind the house to be built, of course, which is in this case an apartment building, power transmission lines, and trees. Now, if one zooms out, I contend that this big mass of land right here is San Bernardino Mountain, and that the vast majority of the views of San Bernardino Mountain are preserved by this project. If we go to another view, view number 7, let me show you again where it is taken from. So view number 7 is right here on the shoreline trail. Let me go back. Oh, I'm sorry, I passed it. View 7. So what we see here is that there's incremental obstruction of a small portion above the existing apartment complex, but if you zoom out, you see quite a bit of what's known as San Bernardino Mountain. If you go to, I'm sorry, I wish I hadn't done that. If you go to point number 4, which may be the closest to some points offered, or some viewpoints, I'm sorry, offered by others in this matter, you can see that if you connected all the story poles, it would incrementally obstruct San Bruno Mountain in the background, above and beyond where the apartment building exists today, and power transmission lines. But if you zoom out, you get to see quite a bit of San Bruno Mountain. So there's no denial that whatever house gets built at 8 Thomas Avenue, no matter how small it is, it would block some views of the San Bruno State and County Park. This is a fact. This is not a matter of opinion. The only matter being discussed here is whether those, quote, public views deemed of community-wide value are preserved or not. It's a judgment call. So I look at this. This is an approximation of the naked eye view, which is that of looking at this awesome site that San Bruno Mountain is. I can still see San Bruno Mountain. And we have to accept the fact that I believe it was in 1970 that this piece of land became legal and buildable. Property rights attached to that lot are enshrined in no less than the American Constitution, and I'm Canadian, so let me pay an ounce of respect to this great document. The Fifth Amendment of the United States of America enshrines property rights. We're not talking about small stuff here, and it's very clear, and there's a ton of jurisprudence about it. So to push back against that, one must have a firm standing. And we have here a judgment call to say that you must preserve those views. If you're against it, you can't just tell the applicant, you don't preserve the views. Go back to the drawing board and come back with something else that preserves those views. You have to give them guidance. The only thing they have to go on is the fact that they've complied to every piece of legislation offered to them or imposed on them, if you want to look at it that way, at the federal, the state, and the local level. And they've gone to bat for the application for design permit 1-13, and they got a unanimous approval. So, go pound sand? Is that what we're trying to tell them? I'm not quite sure that this makes sense. That's the extent of my remarks for tonight. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Luke. The last slip that I have tonight is our Chair of Planning Commission, Carolyn Parker, and you're going to read a letter from Commissioner Van Doe. And Carolyn, I take it that you're speaking for the commission themselves.
For myself, I'm speaking, I'm very happy that you are reviewing this. I think we have a lot of questions that need, and we do want some guidance, or at least I personally do. I feel that I was tremendously heartened by all the people who came and spoke about this issue. And I'm very pleased that there's an equal amount of people who are coming here tonight. I feel that the whole city needs to kind of look at this ridge line and decide, how to approach the buildings on the ridge line. So I thank you very much, and I appreciate all the help we can get. Commissioner Van Doe sent a letter of 4 pages about her reasoning for voting for the project. And I think I will read that because I think that pretty much covers a lot of what we talked about. And if other commissioners want to speak in addition or present their ideas, I would welcome that.
Let me stop you there for a second. I want to ask the city attorney about that. about other commissioners speaking. We have chair of the commission who really represents the commission. So can you kind of comment on other commissioners speaking? And
generally, when you have a commission, the chair of the commission speaks on behalf of the commission with respect to the formal position. However, given Brisbane's practice of allowing the maximum possible public comment, I mean, if there was another commissioner or commissioners that wanted to add to those comments, I think that that would be legally permissible as well.
okay. All right, go ahead. Continue.
So this is Commissioner Van Doe. She wrote quite an extensive letter. She says, Dear City Council, please pardon my absence. I have previously scheduled mandatory meeting that conflicts with tonight's City Council meeting. As per our Planning Commission meeting on Thursday, February 27, 14, and in lieu of my absence, I am submitting a summary regarding my decision concerning the application of 8 Thomas Avenue that was decided by the Brisbane Planning Commission on November 14, 2013. In sum, I approved the Mon Quan, the applicant design permit DP 113 and grading permit EX 112 because, 1, the application complies with the applicable Brisbane municipal codes. 2, the decision is based on applicable codes and applies the standards set forth in the current ordinance. 3, the decision upholds the current ordinance. 1, application complies with applicable ordinance. With regard to this application, the applicable code sections are Brisbane Municipal Code Section 17, the first 2 provisions, 17.12.040L2 and 17.42040 apply to the applicant's design permit, while the latter 2 provisions, 15.01081 and 17.32.220 apply to the applicant's grading permit. While the entire application is on appeal, the central issue pertains directly to the applicant's design permit, which is governed by the first 2 provisions generally referred to as the Ridgeline Ordinance. 2, the Planning Commission decision is based on applicable codes and standards. To approve a design permit, the Planning Commission must make 10 applicable design permit findings. 1, the Ridgeline development, the Planning Commission shall find that the building's placement, height, bulk, and landscaping will preserve those public views of the San Bruno Mountains State and County Park as seen from the community park and from the Bay Trail along Brisbane, Lagoon, and Sierra Point shorelines that are found to be of community-wide value. The Planning Commission met this charge by evaluating the application based upon the standards provided within the ordinance. As such, it is upholding the current law, which permits building as long as applications are in compliance. The application is at issue in this compliance. General plan consistency. As per the ordinance, the proposed development is consistent with the general plan and any applicable specific plan. This application is consistent with the general plan and the related policies. In general, the general plan land use designation for this site is for residential use. In terms of policies regarding the ridgeline development and view protection and grading, policies 83 and 18 apply. By meeting the ridgeline ordinance, this application meets policy 83 because policy 83 is implemented through the ridgeline ordinance itself. Policy 18 is met because this application seeks to find a balance of both minimizing grading and respecting and fitting comfortably within the topography by stepping the home down the hill. 3, compatibility with adjacent development. As per the ordinance, the orientation and location of buildings, structures, open space, and other features integrate well with each other and maintain a compatible relationship to adjacent development. Here, the application meets the specific development regulations regarding the size of the building, the floor area, the lot coverage, the height, as well as placement, the setbacks for the zoning district. In relation to adjacent development, the already approved 88 Thomas Avenue application is the only adjacent development with the same zoning district and serves as the best comparative basis. Like 88 Thomas, this application would be located as low on the hillside as possible while retaining the 20-foot habitat corridor in the rear setback and its ranch-style design complements. 88 Thomas Avenue's modern architectural design. 4. Potential impacts on adjacent land uses. As per the ordinance, proposed buildings and structures are designed and located to mitigate potential impacts to adjacent land uses. While there may be potential impact on adjacent uses, it would affect private views from the lower apartment building along with those belonging to private properties in central Brisbane across Thomas Ridge to the bay. Private views are not protected in the ordinance. The Ridgeline Ordinance protects public views specifically from the lagoon and Sierra Point perspective. As was discussed at length at the public hearings, the public views are at issue, and what constitutes view is discretionary and individually interpretive, meaning that the Planning Commission may use its own discretion as it balances this issue with other public interests. Furthermore, the application lowered its height to address the views from the specific public trails, which help to reduce the view impacts on existing private views. 5. Natural heating and cooling. As per the ordinance, the project design takes advantage of natural heating and cooling opportunities through the building placement, landscaping, and building design to extract practicable given site constraints to promote sustainable development and to address long-term affordability. In this application, the design includes windows placed at appropriate places, which will allow for natural light throughout the unit and adding cover and reducing the need for daytime lighting. The eaves provide shading adjusting to the solar heat throughout the seasons. 6. Minimizing traffic effects. As per the ordinance, the site plan minimizes the effects of traffic on abutting streets through careful layout of the site with respect to location, dimensions of vehicular and pedestrian entrances and exit drives, and through the provision of adequate off-street parking. There is an adequate circulation pattern within the boundaries of the development. Parking facilities are adequately surfaced, landscaped, and lit. The application meets this requirement because the driveway is accessed from Thomas Avenue and there will be 7 spaces, 3 more than the required 4. The proposed gate will not encroach on public space since its driveway length is adequate to allow a car to pull completely off the street while the gate is open. 7. Appropriate landscaping. As per the ordinance, the site provides open areas and landscaping to complement the buildings and structures. Landscaping is also used to separate and screen service and storage areas, break up expanses of paved area, and define areas for usability and privacy. Landscaping is generally water conserving and is appropriate to the location. Attention is given to habitat protection and wildlife fire hazard as appropriate. To be in compliance, the application contains a conceptual landscaping plan that complements the building in scale and excludes tree species which would block views. The proposed plan uses a drip irrigation system that has low water use and proposes planting water-conserving plants with permeable pavers that would minimize stormwater runoff. 8. Noise measures. As per the ordinance, the proposal takes reasonable measures to protect against external and internal noise. The application meets this responsibility and is encompassed in the negative declaration that compels an acoustical analysis showing that the proposed design will limit exterior noise to 45 decibels in any habitable room. 9. Avoiding glare. As per the ordinance, consideration has been given to avoiding off-site glare from lighting and reflective building materials. Like requirement number 8, the application meets this duty because it is governed by the negative declaration, which includes a mitigation measure that requires a low-level exterior lighting to be directed away from adjacent properties and not upward into the night sky, which may result in off-site impacts upon neighboring properties, and B, an exclusion of highly reflective glass and other exterior building materials. 10. Screening utilities. As per the ordinance, attention is given to the screening of utility structures, mechanical equipment, trash containers, and rooftop equipment. As with the other 9 requirements, the application complies with this obligation. The PG&E meters and electrical boxes will be screened from view on the north side of the house and by landscaping along the interior side setback. The trash enclosures will be located behind a retaining wall enclosure adjacent to the driveway and behind front yard landscaping. Thus, the application meets all 10 requirements as laid out by the Ridgeline Ordinance. The Ridgeline Ordinance also provides additional tools where the Planning Commission can and did use at its discretion to modify the proposed project on a case-by-case analysis to ensure that the application further complies with the ordinance. Methods to accomplish this may include varying the building's roof line to reflect the ridgeline's topography, orienting the building to minimize the impact of its profile upon public views, locating the building on the lower elevations of the site, and reducing the building's height below the maximum permitted in the district. 3. Planning Commission decision upholds current ordinance. Here the applicant has made considerable modifications to its application in good faith attempt to comply with the ordinance, and the applicant's architect testified before the Planning Commission that A, varying the building's roof line, B, orienting the building to minimize the impact, and C, locating on lower elevations were not done because they were not viable architectural options given the location and topography. However, in terms of locating on lower elevations, the applicant reduced the elevation as much as possible where one corner cannot move any further. Additionally, the applicant reduced the height of the building from 35 feet to 25 feet, which included reducing the square footage, chimney height, and bulk of the structure. This adjustment is a full 10 feet lower than his original plans and well under the permitted height required by the ordinance. In evaluating this application, the Planning Commission was tasked with balancing the individual community members' property right to build a family residence within a permissible building zone against the larger community interest of preserving the mountain a public treasure. The Planning Commission employed the applicable law and its standards and found that the application met the necessary requirements without sacrificing the community interest as laid out in the ordinance. Hence, the application is in compliance and should be approved. So I will give this.
Okay, you can give it to Sherry. Thank you, Carolyn. I don't have any more slips. I don't know if more people want to talk, but I'm under pressure right now and like to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. We'll keep the public hearing open and come back and take more testimony, okay?